I go back to, the three sources of fulfillment in life are relationships, impact, and growth. We need to have meaningful relationships. We need to feel like we're making an impact, which gives us relevance. And we need to grow so we can continue to be relevant. That is not because some psychologist decided that was the case or some coach or some guru. It's because back in the Serengeti, when we were thousands and thousands of years ago, the number one predictor of lifespan was whether or not you were alone or in group.
Can you achieve extraordinary results while making the world a better place? I'm Bruce Temkin, and together we'll explore how. Welcome to Humanity at Scale, Redefining Leadership podcast. Join me as I speak with visionary leaders and top experts to uncover the secrets of humanity-centric leadership. Ready to rethink leadership? Let's dive in.
Welcome back to Humanity at Scale. We live in a strange paradox. Never in history have we been more digitally connected, yet people are lonelier, less trusting, and more disconnected from community than ever. Friendships feel fragile, neighborhoods feel distant, and even at work, many people feel unseen. That paradox is a real test of leadership, because the question isn't just how we connect people to technology, it's how we connect people to each other, to purpose, and to meaning. Today's guest, Aaron Hurst, has spent his career at the center of that challenge. He founded the Taproot Foundation, which pioneered skills-based volunteering. He built Imperative, a platform for activating purpose at work. And now he's leading the U.S. Chamber of Connection, tackling loneliness and disconnection at a national level. Aaron has been called the voice of the purpose economy, arguing that purpose itself is a defining force of our time. And that's where we're going to start. Aaron, welcome to Humanity at Scale.
Wonderful to be here with you, Bruce. Excited for the conversation.
Cool. Not everyone listening may know your journey. So let's start with the basics, who you are and how you came to focus on purpose and connection. So if you had to tell the short story of your career, how would you describe it?
I think the origin quickly is my grandfather was the original author of the strategy for the Peace Corps, which was really how he was trying to really work to prevent World War III by bringing people together through shared purpose, and then ran the Aspen Institute for roughly the first 25 years. So that very much is like where I got through the imprint for this work at a family level. I'm very blessed by that. And, ever since college, I've been doing different projects around purpose and connection, whether it was teaching in prisons, whether it was working in education in Chicago, Silicon Valley, as you said, Taproot, Imperative, always working to figure out how do we bring purpose and connection together, but do it on a massive scale, because the challenge is one that needs a massive response. And that's really how I'm wired as well, is to really look at what are the systems level changes that we need to create the broader impact that's necessary.
So I got to dig a little into that. Teaching at prison. How did teaching at prison, what did you learn from that? Because that's sort of a unusual background for someone to have.
Yeah, so when I was a student at the University of Michigan, created a program where we took Michigan students out to teach in the local correctional facilities, both adult and juvenile, and taught creative writing in those schools, and then tied it back to an interdisciplinary curriculum. It was really my focus as an undergrad was on service learning. How do we learn through the act of service? And really learned a lot about the efficacy of that. Every student we had from Michigan said it was their best class in their 4 years at Michigan. And Michigan's an amazing school. And that was what stood out, says a lot about the power of service learning. I think second, it taught me a lot about bridging and how do we help people from different backgrounds and different experiences and different realities find shared humanity together. And through that, be able to have a greater insight into how society does work and how it should work.
Well, I want to dig into some of your core efforts. And let's start with Taproot.
Sure.
Because it's such a powerful example of building something that didn't really exist before. You took the idea of pro bono service, something people usually associated with law firms,
That's right.
and expanded it into a movement that connected business professionals with nonprofits at scale. Taproot helped redefine how organizations, I think about talent and impact. So let's go back to those early days. What sparked the idea of Taproot?
One was I had been working in Silicon Valley trying to understand scale, because I knew that for the nonprofit sector to be able to really deliver on what it's being asked to do since the Reagan Revolution, which really there was this push to say nonprofits and companies need to solve problems because the government isn't. Nonprofits are going to have to scale to a greater level of impact. So I was understanding how companies were doing that. And I realized yes, money is a major variable, but a lot of it was talent and the ability to build infrastructure ahead of need instead of behind need. So that was sort of a major input. And that really tied to, if you think about the pro bono service movement broadly, it started in the Kennedy administration when there was a call from the White House to law firms to say, if we don't um, address the civil rights laws that we've just passed and help enforce them, they're not going to work. And that was really what brought pro bono into the legal profession in a major way. And what we saw was this opportunity to have a parallel moment and worked with the White House to really create a campaign to say, coming out of the restructuring of our economy and the social contract, now is the moment companies need to step up, business professionals need to step up and build the infrastructure of the nonprofit sector.
So, how did you convince companies that pro bono could be more than just a side gig?
I think there's a couple of things. I think one was just at the time, a typical hour of volunteering was worth, say, $20, whereas the average hour of pro bono service was about 200. So just showing them, like, if you're going to volunteer, why not use sort of the full capacity of your people? I think secondly, it was being able to create peer pressure through networks so that companies were competing with each other to get to do more pro bono service. And then going back to the start of our conversation, service learning is much more powerful in most cases when you're actually applying skills that are from your job than doing it abstractly. So the ability for business professionals like today to be able to use AI, the pro bono work they're doing, is going to greatly help them accelerate their use and ability to effectively use AI in their workplace as well. So from a learning and development standpoint, there was a really strong case for pro bono. And I think the final piece I would say is companies invest in nonprofits. They are doing philanthropy. And when they're giving money to a nonprofit, they're seeing how the lack of capacity and the lack of infrastructure is preventing their dollars from having as big an impact as they could. So these philanthropic leaders are seeing firsthand that there's this incredible need for nonprofits, and they're often being asked for cash to solve those problems, and their ability to instead use their talent to do that is just such a clear multiplier for them.
So, I love it. So, it's talent, so that your talent grows, your contribution grows, everyone wins.
That's right.
So, if you, looking back, what were some of the highlights of successes with Taproot, and where do you think it fell short?
It changed the nature of corporate volunteering, and it changed the way nonprofits think about talent and think about partnering with companies. I think those were major sort of positive milestones. We also just really saw some major milestones in terms of systems level change, or like changing in measurement and changing in how I think the existing platforms were thinking about skills-based volunteering and pro bono work. So there's some major positives there. And then partnering with BMW, we took it to 30 countries around the world. So that was an incredible sort of accomplishment. I'm also just very proud of the micro. We had marriages that came out of it and good friendships that came out of it, just because people were connecting through service in such a powerful in-person way. Something that's in decline, sadly, today in the field of volunteering, which has become much more transactional. The need is just massive, and really figuring out, like, how do you address that? I think the challenge we have is actually much broader, which is nonprofits were never set up to scale. That was never the point of a nonprofit. Nonprofits serve one of two purposes, really. One is to meet a hyper niche need that the government wouldn't address, which is not a scale need, or to operate as R&D for bigger government programs. Like, that's what the nonprofit sector was really designed for, is those two things. When we sort of got rid of the social contract where government was playing the role that it was historically and asked nonprofits to scale, we were asking a sector that didn't really have the right economic model or infrastructure to do that. So I think while we were able to help in a lot of ways, there's a more fundamental structural problem in our society around how do we meet these critical cultural and social needs and economic needs. And that I don't believe at the end of the day, companies and nonprofits can do that on their own. I don't think the system's not designed for that to be effective, as attractive as it may sound.
Interesting. So, if we just think chronologically, I think that sort of is it fair to say that Taproot led you into writing the Purpose Economy book? In terms of timing, that was the next step. In that book, you argue that purpose isn't just a corporate value,
Yeah.
but it's a defining force for a new era. That's a bold claim. Why did you frame it as an economy rather than a trend?
My uncle was an economist at Stanford and wrote The Information Economy, and made the argument that we'd gone from an agrarian to an industrial to an information economy. And he made that argument in the 70s, which I think was pretty prescient in terms of like what was going to happen. What I was seeing with Taproot was that there were fundamentally different choices being made. And if you think about an economy is largely around choices around resources. And there are different choices being made about the workplace, Bruce, and like where people are willing to work, what they're willing to do. That was being driven by the rise of a different type of worker and a different type of value creation. And then secondarily, we saw in the consumer markets that individuals were making different buying decisions based on their need for purpose. So it wasn't just about saying they want to buy from a company that has good values or CSR. It was actually saying they had psychological needs that they were spending money to meet for their own well-being, for their own mental health, and that was shifting again where a lot of innovation and changes in the market were coming from. And you could see that in just the massive changes in the marketing at the time, and increasingly so, where selling the psychological benefits, the purpose has become a major pillar of marketing because understanding that consumer behavior. So that was my argument for why that is. I think I also really spent a lot of time talking about the science behind this because we tend to think of purpose as a faith-based thing or a coaching thing or a nonprofit thing. But the research that's been done and that we did really proved that most of how leaders think about purpose is wrong. And that it's actually just a core psychological human need. And therefore, it's not a nonprofit thing. It's not a faith thing. It's not a corporate thing. It's like anyone who's interacting with humans needs to understand purpose because it is a major driver of behavior.
I've written and spoke a lot about intrinsic needs, one of which is meaning.
That's right.
And purpose gives meaning, and people work harder, work more effectively, get more flow, and all those great things. Now, 10 years or a decade later, what has reinforced or challenged your vision from that book?
I think there's been things that have challenged me to think differently and process it. I think in 2016, the election of Donald Trump as president, I think really, which was going against, I think, a lot of where traditionally we thought about this work, gave me definitely a year or two of pause. But what really came out of that for me as I reflected on it more is that our quest for purpose doesn't always lend towards only one type of purpose, that in fact, actually, our need for meaning, our need for community, our need for growth can push people towards a lot of different ways to seek that. And that actually the rise of Donald Trump and the MAGA movement actually was a purpose driven movement. It just may not be the purpose I personally am behind, but actually it rose in large part because that need wasn't getting met in society. And a lot of people were feeling like they were no longer relevant. They didn't have community. They didn't have the ability to make an impact. And they saw in that movement an opportunity to do those things. So that was a major shift in my thinking from, oh, I got this wrong to like, oh, like this is actually just another example of that being the case. I think more recently, what's become really, I think, interesting to me is just how the labor markets have shifted. I think we went from technology being the sort of power that was giving more power to workers. I think what AI is doing and what we're seeing is actually decreased power for the workforce. And that tends to put the psychological needs of employees lower, which is then decreasing corporate investment in those areas. That's generally cyclical, but generally on a specific, overall is trending up in terms of power. But right now we're sort of in this down cycle, I think, around the prioritization of those needs. On the consumer level, I think it continues to be a major driver for people in terms of how they're spending their money, what they're doing. We're spending a lot of money invested in mental health, well-being. We're seeing a lot of people buying based on brand affiliation and their desire to want to make an impact. So I continue to see those trends very much moving forward. But we have, I think, with technology, created a lot of problems when it comes to people actually being able to live with purpose, in large part because, as you know, meaning is created through reflection. Nothing has meaning unless we reflect on it. And when we're on social media all day and on our laptops all day and watching Netflix, we basically removed all reflection out of our lives. And even if we're doing amazing work, it's meaningless because we don't have the space for reflection. It's like we're getting all those coins for meaning, but we're not putting them in our piggy bank, so they don't actually ever add up to anything.
I think about a month ago, an article on the importance of both intention and reflection,
That's
right?
right.
The meaning beforehand, reflection afterwards. I want to go back to the discussion you had a little bit a few minutes ago about the MAGA movement, and without
Yeah.
getting political, because I think we can learn without being political. But
Yeah.
I had a great guest, Kurt Gray,
Of
on a month and a half ago, and he talks about sort of what enrages the left and the right with each other, and his hypothesis, which I think ties nicely to purpose, is that people seek to avoid harm, that really are
themselves or
driving
fellow.
purpose for themselves.
Yeah.
So that the rise of things like the MAG movement and the tension between groups are that they see those risks to themselves differently than those other groups do. One group might see that the risk is that the elite are taking over and eliminating their individual rights. Another group might say that the collective democracy is being put at risk, which is scaring the future of me and my kids, along with harm to the planet. How do you think that notion of avoiding pain and risk plays in your view of purpose?
I think people's opinions and beliefs are highly malleable, and highly tribal. I know a lot of people who are like conservative in nature, but because they grew up in a sort of democratic household, like shift that way and vice versa. It has much more to do with social behavior than it does about, like, I think, deeply held beliefs. It's very tribal. And I go back to, I mean, the three sources of fulfillment in life are relationships, impact, and growth. We need to have meaningful relationships. We need to feel like we're making an impact, which gives us relevance. And we need to grow so we can continue to be relevant. That is not because some psychologist decided that was the case, or some coach, or some guru. It's because back in the Serengeti, when we were like, thousands and thousands of years ago, the number one predictor of lifespan was whether or not you were alone or in group. If you're alone, you didn't last for long. If you were in a group, you did. So our brains are wired to need to be part of a tribe. Like, we are just wired for that. And we need to be relevant in that tribe, to continue to stay in that tribe. And when there's scarce resources, to be one of the ones who gets those resources. And we need to continue to grow so we can maintain that relevance, so that we can stay in the tribe. So as we look at, I think, what's going on in the US, is a lot of that's what's playing out, is people are wanting to feel like they've got community. They want to feel like they're relevant, and they want to feel like they're growing towards some future. And there are different narratives of how to go about doing that. And what political parties do when they're successful is they find ways to create a narrative that brings those three things together, and is either based on hope or it's based on grievance, that then fuels that, which is really the two sides of purpose. It's love-based purpose and hate-based purpose in a lot of cases. I think today we're seeing a lot of both from both sides, and it's sad. And I continue to blame a lot of it still on social media, which has prevented us from actually operating across tribes, if you will.
I think it's interesting because I do think that the rise of digital platforms, social media, other things, has changed the notion of tribalism, right? Tribalism used to be very local, your church, your neighborhood, right? In which case there weren't a lot of dissenting views and a lot of ways to really go outside the norm and refuse with a different group.
That's right.
But this digital community, you can find like-minded people for your tribe in almost any crazy topic that you come across, right?
Well,
So in that world, how do you deal with that? How do you sustain purpose in that fragmented, distributed environment?
I was listening to Pivot, and Gavin Newsom was on, I think, last week, and he was talking about how he used to believe strongly that all politics is local, and he's recently realized all politics now is national. It's not local, and that's a major shift. And I think with that, therefore, like, there's major swaying of like how people operate and how they show up. From a political standpoint, and how they think about it. I think in some ways it's easier to find purpose because you can find people with highly aligned interests and who share many more things in common. I think the challenge is that humanity thrives on a hyperlocal basis. It thrives based on knowing your neighbors. It thrives based on social connection. It thrives based on feeling connected to place, feeling connected to community. That's what actually drives mental health. That's what drives our ability to collaborate, et cetera. And by diminishing that, we've dramatically, I think, decreased our ability to actually thrive. I would add to that, the U.S. has a problem that's pretty specific to the U.S. that's been framed as a positive, but it has a very strong negative externality, which is Americans move all the time. I've moved 12 times in my life. Because we move so much, it removes that local connection to place and to people, and it disrupts our social connections and our connection to family.
Awesome. So I want to keep going with this sort of walk through the evolution of your career, moving on to imperative.
Yeah.
So after Taproot, you took a really interesting, what I think was an interesting term. Instead of focusing on nonprofits, you built this imperative, which was a platform that measures and activates purpose at work through peer coaching. This was a bold move. You shifted from nonprofit model into a social enterprise and focusing on the daily fabric of work itself. I'd love to dig into that transition. What gap were you trying to solve with imperative?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I would just say, nonprofit, for-profit, like, these to me are more like vehicles, and it's a question more of what fits the thing you're trying to sell and what's the capitalization necessary. So I consider myself a social entrepreneur who uses whatever system is best aligned with the mission of what you're trying to accomplish. So with Imperative, what we were really looking to do is that I had discovered through Taproot and writing the purpose economy, basically the psychology behind purpose so that I could predict, Bruce, the purpose of every employee in a company with a 10-minute assessment, with a high level of acceptance rate. And then a sort of strengths finder is like purpose finder. And had a fundamental belief that if we could find a way to help people drive their careers through purpose, it would develop more of a growth mindset. It would have them be more tied to intrinsic motivation. It would help them find commonality throughout culture and help them find ways to collaborate in ways that they were not currently collaborating. So that was sort of the impetus for that. And I knew we needed to be able to scale that. And it was going to be scaled best through enterprises. And therefore, we needed venture capital to be able to like fuel that upfront growth. And especially since we're serving companies, no foundation is going to fund that work. Like that's not the work they're funding. So it made sense to be a B Corp. We then, as we sort of got significant market share in that, we realized people are like, that's great. I know my purpose. I did this. It's amazing. I compare it with my friend at work, but like now what? And then started really evolving it to become the first ever peer coaching platform. So what we did is we built an AI technology that would sit between two people. Like let's say you and I work together, and it would help prompt us with the protocols and questions to ask each other the right questions and responses to help each other craft our jobs to our purpose and to overcome the challenges and um, embrace the opportunities in our work. And actually found that for non-urgent coaching, peers were able to actually support each other as coaches without any training. And that enabled a whole nother level of professional development. But also we found it created deep relationships at work, more so than anything else that was out there on the market. And really got really interested in like, how do we accelerate and make sort of friends fall in love, as the research shows, or colleagues fall in love. And not meaning that obviously physically, but just in the sense of like that sense of feeling seen, that sense of seeing value, that sense of feeling connected to somebody. And, we were able to roll that out everywhere from like a PwC and Disney, Microsoft to banks to, tech, just all over the place because people were, especially during the pandemic, so hungry for ways to help people connect.
If you're enjoying this episode, make sure to follow or subscribe so you never miss a conversation. We've got plenty more great stories coming your way.
Now, where did that go? Where did that platform end up?
Yeah, so we ended up exiting and selling it to a mentoring platform to become part of their broader offering. They had a large install base of companies, and it helped us accelerate getting that product out into way more companies than we could on our own with our capitalization at the time. It was great to sort of see that opportunity for that next level of impact growth.
Great. So let's now move to what I think is your current one. Unless you do so many things, there could be a more current one, but the U.S. Chamber of Connection.
Yeah.
Love the name, by the way. Very
Thank you.
catchy. It's a fascinating project. It's about tackling the crisis of loneliness and disconnection in America, not just at work, but across society. Why launch the chamber and why now?
Yeah, I'm going to answer that. One just quick thing, I think, especially because we're talking to a lot of leaders today. I took about 2 years off between Imperative and starting the chamber. I started a couple of projects, but I decided I wasn't going to run them. Like I have a purpose leadership development program down in Chile, and then board.dev, which is doing placement of tech execs onto nonprofit boards so that they can help build technical governance. I share that just because I think being a social entrepreneur for 25 years, starting and running organizations, like I had completely burnt out. By the end of Imperative, I was like, I never want to work again. I'm sick of all this. Like I'm just done. And it took about 2 years to pull out of that and be open to even asking the question of what do I want to do next. I had spent, over a decade on Taproot, over a decade on Imperative. Entrepreneurship's this like wild roller coaster. And it really was just about a year ago that I pulled out of that burnout and looked around the country, to your question, and said, what's the number one problem in our country? I don't want to work on problem number 2, 3, 4, 5, 10. Like, what's the number one problem? And it was just so clear to me that the number one problem in our nation is the decline in connection and trust. It's literally killing us. It's destroying our democracy. It's destroying our economy. It's preventing us from being able to rise to the challenge to address issues like climate change. Like, it is the core issue. And yet connection today is not considered a cause. There is no real leadership in this issue. Like here we have the number one issue in our country. Just like we had like COVID, it was the number one issue for a couple of years. Like connection and distrust is that today. But like, it's just completely diffused. There's no accountability. There's no leadership. There's no real collaboration on this issue. And realize that just like the Chamber of Commerce galvanized business, to be able to have a collective voice and to be able to have a collective agenda and to build the capacity of the business community as it was first emerging 150 years ago. We need a new organization that's going to be here for hundreds of years. That's going to be the organization that's going to bring together the organizations, the across sectors working towards connection and doing the collective impact work that's necessary to actually ensure that we are connected as human beings, because it's right up there with air and food and water. Like, we need connection.
How's it going? What have you done? What are you doing to make CEOs treat connection as seriously as they treat revenue growth?
We started, like, as I shared, like, on this project about a year ago, and we launched our pilots in early 2025. We're focused on a few things. First thing we found is that, Bruce, most people don't even know what a healthy, connected life looks like. So we did a very thorough research of all of the studies that have been done across fields, because connection studied in medical arenas, it's studied in urban planning, it's studied in democracy, like, it's all over the place. And therefore, as a human being, there's like no real shared definition around what do I need as a human being. So we developed the 6 points of connection, which is a framework of basically, here's what everyone needs to thrive and to be part of a thriving community. And that's really sort of our bottom line. How do we help those 6 things happen? And then we realize when it comes to connection, like most behavior, people rarely change unless they're in transition. So identifying, like, what are the transitions when people are most open to change around connection? And the number one opportunity was when people move. I think I'd mentioned this earlier. 12 million Americans move every year. Here in Seattle, 150,000 new people come here every year, move here, and they're all giving up friends, giving up family. They're needing that support system. So we started working with the city on the first ever citywide onboarding, thinking about, like, what would the first year of someone's experience be in a new city to accelerate their sense of belonging, accelerate their connection, so accelerate their sense of community across these 6 points of connection. We're partnering with everyone from the city to our local NHL team that's doing a newcomers night each year so that they can celebrate new people to the region. Just really trying to think about how do we just change that experience for people in that first year. So doing that really is an example of how a collective impact campaign could work. We're now shifting into national initiatives. So one is, we found community builders, the people who create the running clubs, the cold plunge clubs, the arts clubs, are incredibly under stress and incredibly critical to our country. People who run them generally are making no money doing it. They're burning out, and they're not even having peer support. So we're building a national network of community builders as a support network, like you would have with any sort of network of CEOs, but they happen to just be these, community builders in our local neighborhoods and our local cities to help support each other and to build up that profession. And then the other major initiative we've just started is, we found volunteering since the days when I started Taproot, where marriages and best friends were common, has dramatically deteriorated from the standpoint of connection. It's become highly transactional, more and more online. People are doing more like episodic versus longer term service. And as a result, we're not seeing the same connection outcomes as we need to. We're also finding that a lot of forms of service. So, Bruce, if you were to host a block party, that's not really considered service in our culture. And yet, if connection is a cause, like, that's one of the best forms of service you could do. So we're looking at how do we both change volunteering so that connection's optimized in it, but also how do we normalize some of the most powerful forms of service, like block parties, like social clubs, and turn those into standardized volunteering that companies would support, that the volunteer ecosystem is supporting broadly. So for that, we're building a partnerships with a series of organizations like Gadara, which is the largest corporate volunteer platform with over 500 companies. We're working with them to figure out how do we change all the programs of all those companies all at once through their system. Or Volunteer Match, which is the largest volunteer database in the world. How can we start to structure how volunteer roles are posted so that it actually starts to influence changes? And then how can we start building education for volunteer managers so that they're actually trained on how to optimize connection in volunteering? So it's sort of an example where we think about like a 3 to 5 year campaign to actually change a whole field within society. And then looking at, I think the next, after that, we've got like 3 or 4 that are sort of on the horizon that we're excited about once we get volunteering sort of fully going.
I'll speak on behalf of my entire audience saying, we're going to love to have you back in a couple of years talking about how you've like cracked the code and it's all working great.
Well, it's going to be because your audience helped do it. So they're going to be part of that story.
I hope so. I always say that to all my audience that you are the spark that can drive humanity at scale. So let's step back, because as you talk about your entire career, there's a clear through line. You've been a change agent, building models where they didn't exist, solving problems that people weren't looking at. So across nonprofit, business, policy, whatever, what patterns do you see in terms of what it takes to drive real change?
I think it's important to understand there's like just different scales of that into your name. I think helping a person matters. And I think that's very important to celebrate that. I aspire to be a spark at an atomic bomb level of just like blowing things up and like thinking about things at like a venture scale of what's possible. Because I think these challenges need to be addressed at that level, and the counterweight or the counter forces are massive. And if we're not building massive responses to them, there's no way that they're going to do anything other than just be subsumed by these other forces, right? So what I see is like we need to truly be thinking about things at scale and at a systems level. I think in the social change community, there tends to be a hyper local focus, which is important, and we need that. Just like we need small business, but we also need the equivalent of enterprise businesses to drive broader change. And we need enterprise social impact initiatives that are operating at that level. And I think too much of the nonprofit sector is because of thinking constraints, resource constraints, and often like being started by people who were not empowered to think big in a lot of ways. It's been diminished in terms of its ability to make that bigger impact, as well as structural funding issues, which we talked about earlier. So, my key insight is just be a spark, but be an atomic bomb.
Well, I love it. I love it because Spark is, all over me. One of the things that's interesting when you talk about it is the solution you see is not owned or embedded in any single organization, right? It's across the organization. So it really does require, I think, architects like you that can look across the different domains and different groups and define ways in which they can work together. So, how could you inspire maybe someone out there to take on the challenge of architecting one of these sort of cross disciplinary organization change efforts?
First of all, don't be an architect if you're not an architect, because we need toilets that work and we need houses that don't catch on fire. Like, if an architect's the thing to be, like, be it, but don't like do it because you feel like that's what you need to be. We found that there's some people who really are wired to help individuals, some that are wired to build organizations, and others that are wired to be architects of movements. And they're all needed, but they're different types of sparks, to use your language. And they're all equally important. And if we had a gap in any one of them, the whole system doesn't work. What I always start with is like, what is the fundamental change that you want to see in the world? Be as bold as you want to be. World peace is generally not a super productive one, but like one level down from that is thoroughly productive. And like, can it be tied to a single metric, ideally? And identify what that metric would be. So that's step one. Step two is like envision that world. Like be able to describe, Bruce, what that world would look like in 10 years, so that people can smell it, taste it, feel it, so they can really like want it and see another version of history going forward as possible. And then really help identify what are the initial steps that can be taken that can give us all confidence that it is possible. What are those initial pieces that are going to demonstrate that this isn't fantasy? This is actually doable. And try to do those in a way that tells stories that inspire people, but then also try to do it in a way in which you're starting to show that you can find the systems, the platforms that this can go on that accelerate it. And it's not one by one, but instead, like with a Gadara, like 500 companies at a time. How can we create that kind of change? Because that's where you can accelerate that out. And with that, I think you also, which we've seen over and over again, you need to be comfortable with 80-20. Disruption often happens because you do something that dramatically changes course, but you have to be willing to let go of a little bit of like the way it worked before. Deciding which 20 is okay to lose is, up to you and your judgment. But a lot of times I see people wanting things to be so perfect that there's just no way to scale it, because scale comes from empowerment, but it also comes from some level of normalization.
You mentioned the fact that to do this well, you have to have a 10-year horizon. So I'm going to ask you a little bit about your 10-year horizon. So when you look 10 years ahead, with AI reshaping just about everything, what do you think about the future of both purpose and connection out there?
10 years from now, I think really what I'm building towards is a vision in which connection and purpose are the organizing principles of people's lives, of organizations, and of communities. And that all the systems are reinforcing those instead of pushing us away from those things. And that's what's ultimately going to lead to a fundamental change in our society where we become people first, connection first, and we start to see dramatic improvements in issues like suicide. We see dramatic improvements in issues like overall health outcomes, where we see a much more inclusive economy, where we see democracy restored to a large degree as a result of that. That's really 10 years from now what I think we all need to be working towards. Will it happen as purely as I would like it to? Absolutely not. But it's the right thing to strive for and to think towards. Because if you lower your expectations, you're going to do half of whatever you expect. So at least do twice what you want, and that way you're likely to get what you want as a vision. And that's how I think about what we're trying to do here. I think AI, we've got to figure out how to use it as a catalyst to honestly get people to realize the stakes, but then also think about how AI can be used as a tool, because it's naive to think that any of these technologies are just going to go away because of the negative externalities associated with them.
Cool. Well, I think that's a energized view of the next 10 years, and I hope we actually reach it or close to it, as you say.
The largest, renewable resource is human energy and hope. If we diminish that, we diminish what's possible. So I think it's critical as leaders that we're in the role of creating hope, optimism, and energy to fuel sort of what's possible, and then providing the vision and guidance to help people get on their journey.
That's a great way to transition into the 3 questions that I always close with for all my guests. First one, what's one leadership skill you think will become even more important in the future?
Listening, and listening. I don't know if it's more important, but it's just it is the foundation of leadership, from day one.
Great. Now, if you could wave a magic wand and change one thing that would make organizations more human-centric, what would it be?
Become relationship first.
What does that mean?
Whether it's in meetings, whether it's in designing customer interaction, whether it's designing your products, begin with how are we strengthening relationships through this? And where are we actually unintentionally diminishing relationships as a result of it? Relationships are where that hope, energy, and possibility comes from. And if you diminish that, you may get short-term efficiency, but long-term, you're just basically diminishing your most valuable resource.
Great. Now, for leaders who are inspired by your work, and I think many of our listeners will be, what's one final piece of advice you'd like to leave them with?
Invest in your relationships in your life. Invest more in your family, invest in friends, invest in your neighbors, invest in your team at work, invest in yourself and your connection to yourself, and really being clear about who you are and that what you talked earlier, that intention. But start to live a relationship-centric life and start to see how that fundamentally changes your well-being, the well-being of those around you, and your ability for everybody to thrive.
Thanks so much, Aaron. It's been a great talk.
Really enjoyed it. Thanks, Bruce.
I hope you found my conversation with Aaron Hurst as insightful and as inspiring as I did. Now let's dive into the after show, a segment where I'll reflect on the key takeaways from this episode. Welcome to the after show. I came away from this conversation with Aaron Hurst feeling both energized and humbled. Energized by the scale of the problems he's tackling, and humbled by the ambition it takes to keep leaning into issues as big as purpose, loneliness, and social trust. There's something remarkable about Aaron. His career leads like a tour through some of the biggest challenges of our time, helping nonprofits scale impact, making purpose measurable at work, and now trying to rebuild connection in a society where loneliness and distrust are tearing at the fabric. He doesn't think small. He looks for problems that cut across sectors and then builds new models to take them on. And part of what makes Aaron so interesting is the legacy he comes from. His grandfather designed the original strategy for the Peace Corps. His uncle coined the term information age. Those are the kinds of influence that leave an imprint, and you can hear it in the way Aaron frames his work on purpose and connection. In our conversation, 5 ideas stood out that capture both the depth of Aaron's thinking and the practicality for leaders who want to scale humanity in their own organizations. First, purpose is a human need. Purpose shapes where we work, how we spend, and what causes we support. But it doesn't just happen. It only comes alive when we take time to reflect. Without reflection, even great work can feel empty. And while the need for purpose is universal, how it's channeled can look very different. At its best, it fuels hope, connection, and growth. At its worst, it can be co-opted into grievance and division. Secondly, we are wired for tribes. From Serengeti to today, Our survival has depended on belonging to a group or multiple groups. That wiring shows up now as a deep need for relationships, relevance, and growth. But in a digital world, we build tribes that are often national or online rather than local. Aaron warned that while digital tribes make it easier to find like-minded people, they weaken the neighborhood-level ties that actually sustain health and resilience. Thirdly, connection is a bare necessity. Aaron was clear. Connection is as fundamental as water, food, and air. It underpins health, trust, and democracy, and its absence is literally killing us. Through the Chamber of Connection, he's treating loneliness and connection as a national crisis. What struck me most was his focus on life transitions, like moving to a new city, as moments to intentionally weave people back into community. And his challenge to broaden what we count as service, block parties, neighborhood clubs, and formal gatherings, shows how powerful everyday acts of connection can be. Fourth, energy and hope are renewable. Aaron reminds us that the most powerful fuel isn't capital or technology, it's human energy and hope. When people believe a better future is possible, they generate the optimism and resilience to push forward, even in the face of setbacks. Leaders play a critical role here. They don't just manage operations, they cultivate energy. That means framing challenges in ways that inspire possibility, creating early wins that reinforce momentum, and modeling optimism themselves. Unlike money or time, hope expands when leaders invest in it. And the final idea is that scaling change takes boldness. Aaron described himself as wanting to be a spark at an atomic bomb level, pursuing change big enough to counter the forces pulling us apart. That means choosing one bold outcome, painting a vivid 10-year vision, and proving it early with leverage points that show that change is possible. And it means being willing to accept 80-20 trade-offs, letting go of a little perfection so scale can happen. His closing advice brought it back to the human core. Listen deeply, lead with relationships, and keep investing in the people around you. So what about you? Where are you creating space for reflection so that your people can make meaning from their work? And are you building systems of connection that are strong enough to stand up against the forces pulling people apart? That's it for now. I hope you enjoyed this episode.
Thanks for tuning in to Humanity at Scale, Redefining Leadership podcast. Remember, true leadership isn't only about achieving short-term results. It's about creating a lasting, positive impact on all of the people you touch. Join me next time as we uncover more insights and strategies for humanity-centric leadership. Until then, I'm Bruce Temkin, encouraging you to lead with purpose and empathy and to be the spark that elevates humanity at scale.